It's been 5 days since the temperature stopped rising above -50. The cold holds over Yakutia. In most winters, smoke would rise from chimneys by this hour, but this morning no fire catches. Matches snap. Diesel is wax. Even the dogs stay down until light. People step outside in fur and canvas, faces wrapped. The air cuts through every gap. They test in order sticks, lighters, alcohol on wood. Nothing takes. Speech stays short. They save breath. In one yard, a man pulls boards from his shed to build a wind wall around his family's shelter. Across the river, women drag frozen fish inside to soften against the logs. Children fetch snow for water, mittens stiff as iron. The dogs are fed early. No panic. Work continues. Fire failed. The routine holds. When the fires failed, life did not stop. Routines adjusted within hours. Across scattered camps, people work the same tasks with tighter rules and fewer steps. Morning started before light. The talk was short. The sound was axes and sled runners. Fishermen walked to the river with rebar and an ice chisel instead of nets, punching through the crust to reach water. They pulled up fish already stiff and stacked them in burlap sacks. At home, the fish were shaved thin and thawed slowly under clothing or against logs. Women kept order. Frost was scraped from rafters, snow beaten off fur coats, hides stretched on wooden frames. Children carried ice blocks, filled canvas pails, brushed frost from the dog's fur and checked harness buckles. Elders stayed inside, repairing boots and mittens with needles of bone and thread of sinew. In one camp, miners stripped panels and bolts from dead machines to brace walls and stop drafts. In another, herders cut windbreaks from drifted snow, banked shelters, and rationed lichen. Dogs' paws were greased with fat to prevent cracking. No one waited for help. The nearest town was days away. Radios were quiet. Engines stayed cold. People tracked hours, saved steps, limited trips outside, shared tools, and rotated chores. Water, food, sleep, dog care logged and checked. By the second night, each camp had a schedule and kept to it. Move, eat, rest, repair, repeat. By the third day, inconvenience turned into risk. Locks froze shut, water barrels split. Food that was cut yesterday was ironed today. The cold began deciding pace and error. Near the river, a fisherman dropped his gloves to fix a sled rope. His fingers stuck to the hook before he could look up. He pressed them under his coat. Around him, others kept working. Out on the tundra, the reindeer balked at the crusted snow. Without heat to soften feed, herders cracked blocks of frozen moss and pushed them to the muzzles. The animals chewed slowly. In the settlements, children stayed inside. Quick breaths burned the throat. Metal took skin on contact. Families sealed gaps with rags and packed snow, keeping bodies close. Movements were rationed, one trip out at first light, one at dusk. A torn boot or loose mitten meant damage. The mood was steady. By the fourth and fifth days, Yakutia was still. Engines and radios stayed dead. Even the river ice was quiet. Survival shifted to small adjustments and tighter rules. Fishermen left their wood huts and moved into the meat pits they used in summer. Below the frost line, the earth held a thin margin of warmth if they stayed still. They slept in turns. 3 men to 1 blanket, backs touching, boots left on to save heat. Hands were kept under coats until the moment of work. Knives were warmed in mittens before cutting. In the herders' camp, reindeer stood through the night without lying down. Frost clung to muzzles. Steam froze on hair. Herders took shifts rubbing snow along legs and fetlocks to keep blood moving. They checked hooves, tightened girths, cleared ice from harness rings. Talk was limited to single instructions: move, hold, wait. At the miners' outpost, metal failed. Steel heads split on first strike. Bolts snapped. They switched to wooden handles wrapped in cloth and used shorter strokes. One man's cough turned red. The others carried him outside and stacked rocks over him when the ground refused a hole. They marked the spot with a bent bar. In the villages, families used body heat as their fuel. They slept in circles and rotated positions on a timer scratched into a board. Frozen fish was shaved thin with a short knife, swallowed slowly to avoid cramps. Water came from ice chipped early and kept in sacks. Tools were shared. Tasks were logged. Steps were counted. No one waited for signals, none came. With each day, the work grew narrower and more exact. Fewer trips, slower movements, fewer words. Fear had no room. Habit took over. The routine was plain and fixed: cut fish, scrape, eat, rest. By the 6th day, the cold no longer felt like weather. It sat in the hands and lungs. Movement slowed. Words came out flat or not at all. Taste dulled. Fingers missed knots. Tools slipped. At the river camp, 2 men went out along a line of willows to look for smoke from another settlement. They set a pace they knew they could hold and carried nothing extra. When light began to fade and they were not back, no one followed. The others kept to the table and the sled, shaving fish, wrapping cuts, stacking them tight. With the herders, a reindeer folded at the knees and stayed down. Ice gathered at the nose. The rest formed a wall against the wind. A herder checked the animal's eye, marked the time on a scrap of cardboard, and moved on. Later, they took the hide and divided the meat without talk. In the miner's hut, a man struck his last match against the heel of his glove. The wick flared, bent, and went out. He watched the thin thread of smoke and then pulled his boot closer to stitch a torn seam with a bone needle. His hand shook once, then steadied. Across the camp, small things began to fail. A mother's grip on a kettle loosened. It hit the floor and she did not react. A boy tried to tie a harness and left the last loop hanging. A knife lay on a board with an uncut strip of fish beside it. Faces held no expression. Tasks took twice the time. By evening, they measured the hours to first light and set a rotation to keep each other awake. They checked dogs, checked hands, checked feet, and held still to save heat. There was nothing to plan. They stayed with the work and counted the minutes. Morning came on the 7th day, the same as the others. The cold held. People woke at the usual hour and went to work without talk. A fisherman thumbed his lighter from habit. The spark caught and stayed. The flame was small and straight. He set a tin cup over it and fed it slivers of dry shaving until the melt began. Word moved slowly. In each camp, someone found a way to keep a flame. Inside a can, behind a snow wall, under a piece of sheet metal. The heat reached only the hands above it. They kept the flame low and steady. Pots took their turn. Snow went in, water came out and was shared by measure. Gloves were dried, then swapped with a second pair. Knives were warmed before cutting. Fish was softened just enough to shave. Boots were turned near the can for a few minutes, then put back on. Dogs were fed and their paws checked for cracks. No one cheered. Voices stayed low, closer to the work than to the feeling. By afternoon, thin lines of smoke hung above the huts. A radio clicked once and stayed silent. A grave was marked again with a taller bar. Lists were updated: fuel left, fish left, thread left. The schedule was set for the night. Who watches the flame, who sleeps, who checks the animals. The week without fire ended without a speech or a lesson. Heat returned in small circles of tin and patient hands. People kept moving in the order they knew: melt, dry, cut, feed, rest, check. One task at a time.